Hello, this is DMs the PM. We like to call that because we are DMs that like to talk at night. And today we have me, Kiko Cavagao, as the host, as well as Robin Ludham,
Hi.
Lex Martin,
Hello.
and Paulo Carmelo.
Good evening, folks.
Thank you guys for joining us. And today's subject we're going to be talking about is villain slash antagonist NPC.
Dun dun dun.
To be very specific, we're not talking about BBEGs exactly, but we're talking about villains that are either reoccurring or one-time use in your campaign.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, sir.
with that being said, what are villain slash antagonist NPCs? Anybody have an answer for that? Who would like to define a villain or antagonist NPC?
Should we define what an NPC is first?
Well, I mean, if they watch,
Yeah.
if they watch the
Yeah.
first episode, not the previous episode, they would know what an NPC is.
Just in case, though.
Just in case if they haven't seen that episode, then an NPC is a non-player character, and that is a character that the players do not play, but the DM plays in the story.
Eh,
There we go.
Yep.
All right. With that being said, who wants to define a villainous or antagonist NPC?
Well, I think in simple terms, even from literature, the villain in general doesn't necessarily have to be a bad guy. He's just he or she or they are the counter to the players. They're the ones who give them something to fight against, something to be their counter, and to kind of give a threat to the characters,
Nice.
or an objective to stop rather.
yeah. And
That is
for
yeah.
me, a villain is something that gives either the players or the story urgency to be moved along. If everything is peachy, ideal, and all's good in the world, then where's the story in that? So a villain is something or someone or a group of people, whoever, that drives that and that move or that plot to say, hey, let me fuck things up and f things up. There you go. It's the other side.
Awesome. Those are both pretty good definitions, and you are both technically right.
Technically, technically.
Awesome.
No, I like to vote that I was more right than Robin. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, all right, bye. I see how it is.
As I sip my coffee. Sorry.
It's all good.
You are wrong. I am right. Ah, beautiful. Next, up to it is what makes a good villain slash antagonist NPC. What are some things that you've guys seen or know of that would make good ones?
Oh my gosh.
That's such a huge question.
Yeah, there's countless
Yeah.
of videos that you can watch on YouTube regarding this whole creating a villain ordeal. I mean, and there's just so many ways of going about it. I think the most important thing is you start off with a noteworthy character that you know is capable of wreaking havoc. That has some sense of just a threat to them, and some sense of danger, so that your players aren't undermining them or questioning whether or not they are a threat. But I guess at the very beginning, I like to make villains just normal characters in the beginning and just have them developed as time goes on. You could also ask the philosophical question of, are they inherently evil? And we'll probably get into more of that, but I'm just rambling right now.
All good.
Yeah. One thing I really like doing is the first thing I always go for is what are they what they're doing has to be somewhat against whatever the hero wants to do, whatever your PCs want to do, either one or all of them. Whatever they are doing has to conflict that. As well as I love what you said about having the villain evolve throughout the story, where they start off as not the villain, but then you see them become one, and that's an amazing plot to go through. Another thing that I believe helps make good NPCs as well, or villain NPCs, could be something that relates to one of the characters' backstories.
Yeah, and a lot of things can happen in that sort of way. And you pretty much first, in order to create a villain, I personally think, what are my characters' motivations first? Are they a thieves guild that's trying to do a heist? Are they part of royalty that's trying to rescue a princess? And from literature or just from your own experience, you figure out, okay, who would be a good one for that? Like, say, for example, Thieves Guild. Okay, then you would have the resident cop or detective be the BBEG that's trying to kind of like, I guess, mess up the Thieves Guild's plans or something. So, like, there's for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. You just need to figure out what that equal reaction is and give it a face, give it a name, and give it some sort of personality that, your players will remember by. That's just how I do it.
Absolutely.
And I would say too, like, because aside from just like individual heroes, like an antagonist thing, it may not even have to be a particular person. Like, it may form into it, but it could just start from an idea. Like, say your country is against certain races, like they're not against elves a majority of the time. Say there's like a virus or some kind of sickness out there, and that's what it stems for. And then if it becomes something individual, like some demon that's causing the virus, or some secret group that actually works for the government, but in all reality they were the ones who were creating the virus, like something
It
like
was
that.
them all
It was
along.
them all along. Like it can become that, or it could just say that, like, yeah, this is the threat and that's what's coming.
Yeah.
So like I think that could also be an antagonist as well.
I also like the idea of a threat being just like a force of nature than just a being, but like an actual, like, this happens every 3,000 years. It resets everything type of situation. And that's always fun of how those characters deal with that. Now all the good things. What makes a bad villain / antagonist?
Okay, I'll start out first. A bad villain? Okay, a villain that's made badly. That's how I interpret this question. Is a villain that's evil for the sake of being evil. That's my way of interpreting it. Like, if there is no logical reasoning for a villain to act this way, there's like, yeah, I'm just gonna kill people because F it, because I'm evil and I want to do this. That doesn't really make sense from a conventional perspective. I mean, you can try to make it make sense, but overall your players will be able to gravitate towards that because they're like, why? There's no pull for me. But if your character is evil, let's say they're doing a whole genocide because they believe that this race is inferior to this. It kind of makes sense, and there's a logical thing for that because that is relatable to the world. But yeah, so back to the point, my biggest pet peeve when it comes to bad villains is evil without any reasoning at all. They're just evil. I mean, there could be exceptions, like maybe the Joker. We'll get into that. That's my spiel.
So murder hobos, no. But it all depends on how you play it. Like, for me, like, it comes from like a mechanical standpoint, not mechanical, but like kind of like on the DM's point of view type of thing. It's like, if your villain isn't hooking or entertaining to your players, then it kind of comes off of when that villain shows up, then people are gonna be like, oh, okay, he's there, I don't really care. And that's one of the things that makes a bad villain NPC. It's just one that just shows up that your players don't really care about, and it's because you didn't really, like, either one, make a good impact with that character, or two, their conflicts don't align whatsoever, or like three, like you said, they're just evil for the sake of being evil, and your players could just kind of like go around them instead of having to go through them.
Okay.
It is one thing that I could see as being bad choices to make when making your villain or antagonist.
So, like, kind of follow up. What do you mean by not entertaining? I understand you mean like there's no pull, it's evil for the sake of being evil, stuff like that. But though it doesn't
If
really.
your villain is played as, if you play your villain in a very boring way, or like, for example, like if they're just very monotone, but it's like you're not trying to make that his character trait, but you're just kind of like, if they're just bland because they're bland, then that will really take your players out of it for their motivation of wanting to even come across this villain.
Would you say that's more at like the DM's expense though?
Yes, it's
Okay.
definitely something that the DM has to keep in mind when thinking about their villains in any sort of degree, whether it's their BBEG or even just a low villain that they're going to probably kill in that game.
Okay, so from follow up on that, I'm kind of piggybacking off of Paulo's comment.
Mhm.
What if you're the kind of DM that is not really good at role playing, so you can't really give that entertainment value that other people want? However, you still want to create a good villain. How would you
Mhm.
compensate for that then?
You compensate for that, for in my opinion, because I would say it's something that you have to do that impacts the characters. So
Okay.
even if that character doesn't like his voice and his mannerisms don't seem like all that entertaining or whatever, they could do something that impacts that character's whatever your PC's character's lives standpoint, whatever. Like they burn down their family home. They like uh kill their dog. Do something, you know, like
Kill
it
their
doesn't have to be
dog.
that big, but it could be like something small. It could be something big. But even if that could help like jumpstart at least some sort of interest of your PCs wanting to encounter your villain, at least. And from there you could kind of build up on that, and then you could learn from your mistakes of building on how this villain could be a bit more entertaining to your players.
Lex? Oh no, Paulo, go ahead, sorry.
Well, yeah. Paulo did his deep breath first, so he should go first.
I was just contemplating on what makes a bad villain, and on the top of my head, I guess like going off of what I said in the beginning, it's just having when you finally encounter a villain and having it be such a letdown and
Mm-hmm.
killing them off fairly quickly, or there's just no development when it comes to, let's say, getting rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't, and it doesn't add to the plot or the storyline at all. I just don't think that the lack of depth that this NPC has would make or break this idea of a villain for me.
Okay, I think a better way to answer the question of bad villains is to ask, of all the villains you've encountered, created, anything like that, what's the part you don't like about it? If you ever thought of a villain like, ew, I don't, why is this villain like this? Like, what is it about that villain that you don't like? Is it the lack of a depth? Is it the lack of motivation? Is it just being the roleplay aspect about it? Like, what is it about? Because that's how I would
Uh,
answer my question.
I mean, I've been fortunate enough to experience DMs that knew what they were doing, so they were able to like nitpick and stitch this villain to be very well crafted. So I can't say from experience, but I
Yeah.
guess it's just going off of the lack of depth and lack of meaning and lack of why they're evil per se, and for the sake of I want to kill humanity because I want to kill humanity, and that's that. Like there has to be more than that. There has to be
Yeah.
more of a reason. Like Tiamat can't just pop out of the ground and say, "I'm going to kill you specifically and your group specifically because I don't like you."
Yeah. Go ahead, like, sorry.
No, it's great. I'm intrigued, so I'm listening.
Yeah.
No, like no, and I think in general, like everyone's like made like the great point, and I think just from like the generating point of view, when you're like just the planning point of view, sometimes you're gonna have a villain, and you're like for example, like what Paulo said with Tiamat, like you want that to be the villain, and you're so in love with Tiamat, and you're like bam, and the crew doesn't want to do any of that. Like they're so anti, like I don't want to save the world, I just want to go have fun kind of a thing, and then you just adjust to that, and you can still have Tiamat, but like I think it's knowing to adapt rather than force them to face the thing that you want them to take down, and it's just not working out because you weren't reading the character right, you weren't reading the players right, and you were forcing them into something that you wanted versus what their characters were building up for anyway. And I think on a side note, from what I think can make a quote unquote like more difficult villain to deal with, or something that I don't like, is like going along those same lines is you may want them to fight a dragon, but if they're like level 1 and you give it to them right away,
That's not a good.
that's not a good thing. Like right
Yeah.
off the bat, or you're gonna have to adjust, or it's smart to build it up because then you have the risk of doing a TPK. So that'd be the thing I watch out for. Is that if you have villains you want to watch, look how powerful they all are, know how to adjust accordingly, or build it up so the players know odds are you're not going to win this. Come back later, kind of a thing. So that's something I would do too.
Yeah,
We'll go more into that definitely in the encounter portion of the
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add on about the whole bringing a dragon at level 1. I think that would be an interesting story arc.
Yes.
And I think if you introduce them as the BBEG, and we'll get to BBEGs in another podcast, but if you introduce them and you see how ferocious they can be, I think the group would be much more on edge about things.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I've used that too, where I've introduced something that's clearly more powerful than the group, like ahead of time. I'm just saying that be careful of committing to that and just think, oh yeah, like this is the fight. Like, hey guys, I want to see if you can have the fight and like live. And it's like, no, they're probably not going to live. They're doing, So that's what I'm saying is that sometimes you got to watch out, especially if you're a new DM. But I agree that they can be used as story arcs.
So one of the examples that I thought of right now when it comes to bad villains, and this isn't existing media, so I'm gonna quote some existing media on here, is Batman v Superman. I don't. The reason why I said that is because the villain there has like been Lex Luthor the whole entire time, right? He's been yes, you Lex. He's been the one that's pretty much been pushing and prodding both Batman and Superman to fighting each other in general. And then when they fight and then when they come together, introduce this big baddie. The problem with that, in theory, it's great. In paper, it's great. But once I saw it on the movie, I'm like, this was not needed. Mainly because this conflict itself is already good shoo-in. And you adding this another villain that was there just to have a heroes versus villains arc, I think it could have been done for another movie because they already had their own story. And I felt like that villain was inserted there just to push some sort of agenda or just to be there. So my reasoning for this villain not being supposed to be there is they were not needed. Like, your villain needs to have some sort of purpose if you want them to provide impact. A purpose that makes sense and is included in the story. AKA if you're gonna have I think it's Doomsday, right? Doomsday, yeah.
It's Portuguese for Doomsday.
Yeah.
It is Doomsday.
It's Doomsday. It would have been great if he was in Justice League instead of BVS, because that's a whole nother story. But that's what I'm saying. Don't shoehorn different. Yeah.
I'm gonna say we're gonna go somewhat tangent, but Kiko said it too. I agree. That was a whole that's the Superman arc, and that should not have been brought up that early.
Yeah.
Anyhow, sorry.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like that's a good example of putting a good villain into a bad thing, which makes it into a bad villain. Is you don't need it. If you don't need it, don't put it in. Put it for something else, and make sure that each villain has its own purpose, and that purpose makes sense with the story.
Absolutely. I completely 100% agree with that. Your villain has to make sense.
Yeah.
All right. With that being said, now, how to craft villain/antagonist motivation. What are some motivations that you always like to see, or things that you've encountered throughout your guys' time playing games and DMing?
Well, sorry. I think my first thing is it's a cliche one, but I think it's good to always remind and put it out there especially for new DMs, and just to remind even current ones, is that the villain should they never think that they're the villain. They never think it, and they always think that their motivations are valid, even if the plans they're going to do are terrible. It's because they have an agenda to it, and they believe that they're the heroes of their story. So I always like that mindset, is that the goal is to not think of it of how can this be the antagonist to my players, but how is this guy guy or girl a hero of their own story first, and then then you're like, oh, okay, then maybe it's not so good, like you said, like genocide and scary things like that, or yeah. But that's what I would say is that I built my villains to be like heroes, like from when I was crafting them mentally, like they were it was me playing them as a hero.
Nice. One of my favorite motivations to give any villain, or like I always like kind of like go to of like, oh, that's actually pretty neat. And it comes in many ways, but the bottom line is that that villain, quote unquote, is trying to keep something safe, whether that be a person or a thing or a group of people or a homeland. But they're doing that in the sense that, like what Lexa said, of like in their head they're the hero, because in their head they're keeping something safe or keeping someone safe, but they're not inherently seeing all the bad things they're doing. I was like, having that small thing goes a long way in a lot of villains.
Now I'm just psychoanalyzing of what would happen in your campaign due to what you just said,
Hey, don't matter.
and try to.
This is this one thing I told Robin earlier. I was like, I'm scared to do this podcast for the sole reason that I feel like you guys, because since you're part of the campaign, would try to pick my brain on everything I would say for the upcoming campaign.
Like, what are you protecting? What is this protection?
I already have a mental wall just blocking off any of my theories right now. I'm like, nope, don't think about it.
Yeah, I'm just mainly connecting a lot of these things from villains that I like in existing media because I believe that's a great inspiration. And for example, and just coming off from me like motivations, honestly believe that one of the best villains I've ever created in media is Loki. Mainly because Loki is the type of person that like what you understand why he's doing it, and in a way can sympathize because you've been there. You've been the person that is, just trying to belong, trying to make a name for themselves, like every other villain out there, but you're doing it in the wrong ways because that's very realistic. And at the same time, I could easily see why they would think this way based on their circumstances. And I think that's one of like, I guess the most tried and true ways of being a villain, but it's also one of the hardest ways to create one, just because you need to have that reasoning, that excuse to see why they would flip like that,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, I've spent countless hours trying to perfect this villain that would just fit so well into the campaign, and ultimately it just shapes throughout the whole storyline that, like, you can't have it 100% from the beginning. I just don't think that's possible for me, at least. But to answer the question of crafting the villain and the motivations it has, I think ultimately you have to start off with a good character. Starting off with that good character and then eventually taking it to the extreme, either through events of hurt and loss, or this ideology that they strongly believe in and force it onto other people so that they can see it their way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of idea that I have for a very well created antagonist.
Yeah. And for me too, like, what helps simplify it further is like, because you guys have all made a lot of great points actually. And one thing to simplify it even further, I always go back to the lantern color wheel. And one thing that I always look at is kind of like each character that you make has specific emotions. Some emotions are stronger than the others. And out of those emotions, how could those emotions create problems?
Wow, never really thought of it like that.
And how could those emotions cause a character to either have a downfall or to motivate themselves into doing something that others might see villainous, but they don't see it that way? And that's what I go to. It's always the basic. Go back to the lantern color wheel, pick the emotions that make up that character, and then see how each of those can overpower or motivate them to do something.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I've never heard of the lantern color wheel. We should probably delve into that maybe later on. But damn, that's a really interesting perspective of creating a villain. Never seen anyone create a villain like that, by the way.
Oh, they're really good. You read a lot of Green Lantern stuff. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. With that being said, we're gonna go into something that's a bit more. Well, this is gonna be a pretty quick one. Well, I want to see what your guys' opinions are on this
Okay.
between independent villain slash antagonist versus dependent villain slash antagonist. And this could be like a thing of like they're dependent. We'll say they're dependent to a certain PC's backstory. Do you prefer ones who are independent from a PC's backstory, or ones who are more dependent on a PC's backstory?
I actually want to tackle this first. I like both, and I think there's certain things that you can get of value, like just as a DM and like for the players when you look at both. Like obviously, I think if you can find an antagonist specifically for the characters, it just makes it that much more personal, and it makes them that much more invested. And so I kind of like using that as like the moment, like that's one of the like your backstabby knives that you're gonna give them. Like when they're generating their character, it's like, oh yeah, okay, well you're, you know, a rogue who left this, you become this kind of like rogue thief after leaving the army. Well, what happens if the army came after you? And then that's your specific thing. But then the cool thing about the independent one is that it gives you the chance to see what they are going to gravitate to on their own. Like a lot of times I make people who potentially could be villains, or I note like, oh, this is happening in this part of the world, or I'll throw something out there, and it's just moving along in the story. And then if they catch on it and they want it, then that's their choice, and they can get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for me, it's like that too. I prefer to think of it as tiers or layers. When I create some sort of campaign or story, I'm probably gonna create some idea of a BBEG that's totally independent of the characters' backstories, because I have my own kind of world, you know? And there is a combination of politics, world building that I insert the BBEG in, that in a way they change. So they have a very trickle down effect on the world that impacts the players in general. And from there, I present that world to the players, they create their backstory, and from there I can pull up bits and pieces of how I can create smaller BBGs that's dependent on the backstory. So that way I can have a bit of both worlds. One where I can make moves as a BBG that's totally independent of what the players are doing, and then I can also create smaller BBGs that the players can that react to how the players do it. So that way there's a mix of independence and, oh my god, every action I make is gonna impact X, Y, and Z in a bad way. So it gives me two things to work with, and I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Paulo?
Whew. I really love both. I really do love both. I can't deny that I've utilized both in my own personal campaigns. I think I do prefer the ones that depend on character PCs, because that feeling of making it so personable, that feeling of you leading up to it and having that backstory be connected and seeing it come to life for the first time in your game just makes it so much more intriguing, and it gets the characters hyped up, and you get to see all their eyes just open up widely, and they're just like, oh, when's it my turn? I just want to hit him. But I think it's just such a beautiful thing to utilize the backstories of your PCs and create something against them. Not to sound maniacal, but it just makes the campaign come to life that much more.
Well, and I think it has like the ability to bond the group like even quicker, because it is so personal that they have to like kind of delve into like, oh yeah, like are we going to help out our buddy with this thing? And then sometimes my favorite thing to do is you give the antagonist for a specific player and you introduce them to the other players and the other player doesn't realize that they're an antagonist, and so they're having this conversation, and then it can do kind of like fun stuff like that, where it's like, oh, like this is actually, and then it leaves like that a villain to one character may even just be a sidekick or someone of psychic quality to another of your characters. Like it, like you said, it opens up all those doors, and that's what I like kind of messing around with, is that it gives you another way to shift perspectives potentially, or just surprise them when they realize, oh crap, we've been befriending so and so's like arch enemy this whole time and we didn't know it. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, a very Chekhov's gun sort of thing.
But
But
wait, there's more. Just kidding.
But I'm gonna agree with you guys on this one. It's really hard to choose between the two of like what I prefer. Emotionally, I love the dependent villain for sure. But when it comes to like my creativity, independent villains is where it's at. Like independent villains give you that free range as a DM to kind of go at like how far you want to take this. How wild do you want your villain to be? How crazy it's going to be without having to like, revert back to this person is completely reliant on this person's backstory. Because once that's resolved, what do you do with this character if that character lives? And that's kind of something that I think of with a lot of my villains, on whether or not I make them dependent or independent to a person's backstory. Although I will say this, taking it back to Critical Role, I really started to get into that series once they started getting to the Briarwood arc. And that was because you started to really feel like every single episode mattered.
Because it's all connected.
And as a player, when things like that happen, where there is a villain who is your like tied to your backstory, that's hanging around doing something, whether they're like in bed with your friends or if they're like out and about, but they're out there. Every session then matters to that player. And for a viewer, it made me like go like, holy shit, I really love Percy. And then you see how all the other characters back up Percy.
Oh yeah.
And it's a good thing to have your entire table rally behind a person's backstory like that, and that's really cool.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and dude, +1 on that, because I personally haven't watched the Briarwoods arc, but I know that's where a lot of people get hooked onto. But that's mainly because it is where everyone kind of like rallies up behind Percy, because there is a big baddie right there that's definitely connected. I love Lexus.
I apologize, critters, who hopefully were interested in this, that one of our DMs has not watched that part of the
I'm watching season 2. I started with season 2. Okay.
I also started with season 2, but let the record show that I watch clips of season 1.
I have as well.
I started off with season 2 because when I first watched Critical Role, I talked to my friends. I said, should I start with season 1 or campaign 1 or campaign 2? And they said, campaign 1's a little confusing. And when I first started listening to them, I was a beginner player. I've never heard of Critical Role. And so they wanted me to just enjoy it from the very, very get-go. So they said, okay, watch campaign 2. Shout out to Emily. But watch campaign 2. And eventually, if you have time, then dwell into campaign 1. And I think that's really just the hook of the Critical Role. Okay. The gateway for me.
Okay, hold on. Let me save something really quick. I'm just hating on you, Robin. Of course, I think any way that you go into it is great, because I think Critical Role is such a great platform for people to jump into. And I've introduced people all the ways. I just have such a special place because that's where I went to. So it's kind of like Star Wars in a sense. Like you're gonna have people who, I am an original like child of this. This is such a big tangent, so I'm so sorry.
It's
but
fine.
and then like I grew up with the prequels, and like that's just how that's my view. Like, I grew up with I came in with the originals. That's why I love it. Side note, everyone, watch Critical Role. Okay, there you go. I'm done.
No, we're just all hating on you now, Lex, for saying
This
that.
is my tangent podcast. Apparently, I'm the guy who brings us on a tangent.
Who-
So sorry.
It's all good.
we all have one.
Lex
We all
was
have one.
so pressed. I was like, oh my gosh,
I was
what's
very.
happening?
I was just like, because you.
It's the Briarwoods arc. Honestly, no,
I love the Briarwoods arc. I love the Briarwoods
I
arc.
understand why, because the Briarwoods arc, in my opinion, and a lot of people in the internet's opinion, is where shit actually happens and like shit gets real, and that's when you get hooked on, because it kind of like, it's like it was a low and then it just went up.
Yeah.
I want to get a taste of that later, but right now I'm on campaign 2. Anyways, Kiko.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I'm not going to continue on the Critical Role stuff. If you guys are interested in watching it, you should be watching it. If you're not, then don't. It's all up to you. So beyond Critical Role and beyond all of that stuff,
Sorry.
We're back.
the next thing I'm going to talk about is large scale versus small scale in Villains Antagonists. This is a thing that Lex has brought up to our prompts, and thank you for that, because I didn't even think about that. What do you guys prefer between having a large scale or a small scale villain/antagonist?
Can you define?
Yes, large scale. This could mean either this is one, legitimately the size is large, like of the villain. 2, this villain has a larger impact on the world than expected. Instead of thinking like this is a personal thing, this is more of like a city-wide or maybe even like continent-wide type of problem. Or like 3, which is like this person that you're going against, this villain has a lot of power, like whether that be an army or just kind of like they have a lot of elemental power or control over something. That could be a problem. Small scale would just be like, this is like your personal level. Like this person, I hate this villain, and because they personally have done something to me, and other than that, they don't really affect the outside world too much.
Me.
Go, Paulo,
Yeah,
go.
So I was like so excited for this question. I love having the small scale villains work for the large scale villains. I love
There we
having
go.
it all link in the end, and when you finally get to the final boss, they're like, "Oh, you didn't know they were actually working for me," and I was like, "What? That's so
The whole
crazy!"
entire time.
I think that just makes it so much more fun when it's all linked together and when all the pieces just lock in finally. Your players have this huge just click moment. Everything just makes sense now. All the questions have been answered. This is why the campaign has been a living hell for us. So that I just got very excited. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well, and I like too that I'm very much in that format too, where the small scale is building up to something else, and even to some extent that this player's group's big scale villain is small scale compared to what's coming. It's like the Thanos thing, and I've hinted it to some of my characters already that like your threat that you're going to fight most likely is going to be big for you, but it's small scale for what's coming, and then like to have that effect and like just the chain reaction. So even on a smaller like within the campaign, like you have this villain who screwed over your developments with your weapons, and he ended up like taking all the weapons away from a certain ally of yours. So that way when you come to like the big bad villain, like your armies or your allies and your NPC friends are underprepared in a certain aspect, and that's how that guy affected it. So I agree with you. I'm just building upon that, is that I love, because I think it can have that chance. And then what I love particularly about big scales is when you get to it is just that in a sense you can make whole scale like world moving events be a character. Like sometimes I've had characters or my players roll for how the army is doing compared to them just like an individual character. I've been like, yeah, roll for how the dwarves are doing against these Duergar right now. Roll for how this awesome NPC is fighting against this one NPC, and then it makes them feel involved, and then it gives you the chance that if you like to be that creative person and that very narrative person, that instead of saying, okay, your player comes and hits them across the shoulder, you're saying this army charges in with the cavalry, and like it makes it like a bigger scale thing. So I love that that's how it develops versus small scale to large scale.
Yeah, more cinematic experience. Um, I I'm actually just learning about all this firsthand. I'm actually the one that's like a newbie DM compared to you guys when it comes to this kind of thought process because I've never thought of large scale versus small scale. But now coming into that, listening to you guys, I think the biggest thing I'm gonna get out of this is large scale villains would be a DM's way of showing a player that their actions have consequences. If they do a certain thing a certain way, if they don't even do a certain thing, you in your head, because you already kind of created it, you'll be able to make those machinations happen, and your player really can't do anything about it. And then they realize after look at the consequences you done, and they're like, oh, should I do that? Yeah, you burned that village down because you didn't try to save it, and now this big baddie right here who has nothing to do with you just did that, and now it's all because of your fault. That's my large scale villain approach. And in a small scale, and like, oh hey, a letter got sent to you. It's from this person who pretty much stole your wife, and now you need to attack, and I need to come after them because he stole your wife, kind of thing. And that's a small scale villain because that attacks to the heart. And what happens if your small scale villain connects to your large scale villain, aka that person that stole your wife is actually the same person that burned that village down? Now you have a bigger motivation to do what needs to be done. So
Yep.
I'm loving the connection aspect about it in regards to how could they overlap and gives what asset do they provide that helps you as a DM influence and build your story.
For me, personally speaking, I love small scale villains way more than large scale villains because
Oh,
of
you're
the
one of those
fact.
people.
Oh no, it's because like as a DM going to a player, crafting that story with that player, like along the way when they don't even realize what's happening, is some of like the most satisfying moments, and will bring your player to feeling some of the most satisfying moments when they finally foil that villain, or when certain things play out in that small scale sense that they will be thinking about and talking about like for like years to come. When it comes to large scale, I mean, you'll always have that epic moment. That epic moment where somebody comes in and smites down like 40 undead, or they like are able to like mount like the evil dragon and help it drive itself into a mountain, and cool moments like that. And that's why I would say like the epic battle scene, like Avengers moments, happen in your large scale, and those are awesome. But then in small scale villains, that's where you get the interpersonal moments where your characters will always remember that forever.
Can I just add one more comparison? To me, it's kind of like for those who've seen Inglorious Bastards,
Oh God.
it's like the
Yes.
ending theater scene versus the bar scene. Like
Yeah.
the intimate small scale versus what ends up being like the big plan for everybody
Mhm.
is that they're all great in their own ways, but like there's something like I just want to feed off like your appeal to that, those small moments where it's like you don't know what's gonna happen. It's so personal and it's very direct. And like Kiko, like just to share it with the audience, had a great moment with somebody that I gave him where it was all dialogue and the tension was building up, and basically there was a guy who betrayed his crew, and he had been there this whole time and they weren't sure, and then they kind of got it confirmed, and we just talked and talked through it. And then, like, spoiler alert, like Kiko's character did something and he ended that guy like right in that second, by a smart choice. And it was so shocking to me, but it was so great because it wasn't world changing. Like there was still this big threat coming to the crew, but he had that little victory that kind of is going to eventually push the story forward in some way. So I think yeah, I can see that appeal.
Yeah. And as a player, like that one kill in the story felt more satisfying than even some of the fight encounters.
Mhm.
And that's something you can accomplish with a small scale villain. Although I will say this, if you are a really great DM who can weave your small scale NPC villains into your large scale things, you got it good. That's good. Like if you can do that and make it seem seamless, then holy shit, that you're stepping up your DM skills there
On a,
for
on,
sure.
on a note to help out, because I understand that we're talking about world scale versus personal scale villains here. If a person doesn't know how to build personal scale villains, this how I can help out. My biggest thing is to listen to your player and listen to the sessions. Not player as in the player, but like how they act, because the definition of a villain in a story is to be the counterpart. So what makes a great personal villain is someone who understands the opposite of that. So if you can create a personal villain that's the total opposite of the character, like the Harry to your Draco or something like that, the Aang to your Zuko, it would definitely impact them in ways that you didn't even realize just by creating a villain from scratch. Use your player characters, influence, and actions to build that personal villain. And it's not easy. It definitely takes some tries, and sometimes you may mess up, but build on that. You guys are gonna have a lot more sessions. It'll help out.
Definitely. With that being said, did everyone have their piece on small scale versus large scale?
Oh, we're doing this?
Oh, hell yeah. All right, next. Before we get to the exercise, we're going to go to how to structure villains / antagonist encounters.
Oh.
Harder thing, in my opinion.
Can you explain about that topic?
Oh, okay. This basically comes down to how do you present your villain / antagonist? How does your villain antagonist how does your villain / antagonist appear to your PCs? How often do they appear to your PCs? Do they fight them often? Do they just show up for story beats? Is this a slow buildup? Is this a short buildup? How do you guys prefer, or methods of building a structured encounters of your villain / antagonist to your PCs? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're thinking.
Okay. Well, if you guys are thinking, I'm gonna go ahead and start ahead. While you guys are thinking.
Yeah.
Well, Kiko.
One thing I love about the structured encounters is I always love a reoccurring villain. Whether or not the characters know that's a villain or not really depends on the story. I like them not knowing, but other times when they do know, it's always cool for this character to always keep coming back and forth, and just kind of you have no idea what's gonna happen next. It's that Chekhov's gun of you have no idea what the fuck is gonna happen. Also, one thing too is a quick short story too. Your villain / antagonist does not have to be the villain / antagonist for the entire campaign. Just because they start they could be a villain and then a good person then end up being a villain, but they could also be the opposite. They could be a villain and then end up being good in the end, such as Zuko from Avatar: Last Airbender. He started off as a dude going after the party the entire time. And then after 2 seasons, they start changing and they start evolving, and then eventually they join that team. Just because we're talking about villains / antagonists doesn't mean they always have to stay that way.
And I think that's cool because I didn't even think to touch that subject, even though subconsciously I think DMs will eventually get to that point. That's cool because sometimes also it's great when you have it where it's kind of like an enemy is my friend situation where they don't even have that turn. They don't even become better. They're just still their same jerk selves, and they're still against the group, but it's we're against you, but that guy's worse and he's against all of us. So let's deal with it. And then it kind of, in the middle of the session, lets you have internal battles while you're fighting the bigger battle. So I think that's a cool thing that you brought up.
Also, it also gives you that cerebral, emotional moment when it's the hero, as a hero, you're powerful, or that hero is powerful, and the villain they've been fighting against, whether that be a stalemate or a barely win on either side, how powerful they are separately. But when those two team up against something else, it escalates, because then you feel that threat is more threatening if it has to take these two powerful beings to help each other out. You're gonna shit bricks when you realize that Batman and Deathstroke are working together to fight you. It's that moment of when both villain and the hero turn around onto one person, and that's their next focus, and that gives that weird emotional click of oh shit, shit's happening, shit's going down,
Yeah. To answer your question regarding the encounters, I think that it can also be connected to your world scale versus personal villains. And I'm kind of connecting this to like Pokemon. I know it's a long shot, but the reason why I'm saying this is your account the recurring villain encounters. Let's say that Gary or Rocket or Team Rocket, right? They're your personal kind of villains because they're always out to go against you personally. And so you see them pretty much almost every other session because they're constantly bothering you. However, you know that there's always that looming presence of the boss of Team Rocket or just the world environment changing for Pokemon, like your BBEG in general, that they're not showing, but you can definitely sense their presence there via an army moving across the land and destroying X, Y, and Z. Or you can have like a change in political climate because of this. They're not there, but you know just in the back of your head that they're there, and you're gonna be like, oh shit, this is something bigger than I thought. This is gonna be the back of my head. It's not reoccurring in terms of direct, but it is reoccurring in terms of presence. And that's, I think, how it's connected to the world scale versus personal and the reoccurring encounters. And all of that is just the DM looking down like, haha, how can I fuck up my players this time kind of thing. That's all.
I'll say too, for up and coming DMs, make sure you know when to put your villain slash antagonist in and when to not do that. Especially if there's going to be a scenario where like your players are super aggressive,
And they're like,
and then you're just like, oh, Strahd shows up in front of you, and then they're like, I'm going to go ahead and
try to kill
turn
them.
in dead or smite them. And then you kind of have to find a way to like work around that, or like just generally speaking, like, or just not have them show up yet. One thing I also say too is that when you're building up your villain slash antagonist, they don't even have to like be there. Their presence could be there. Their presence could be there from a letter they send continuously, chasing chasing your heroes. It could be something that's like you're building up to that final encounter with them, with the final reveal, even if it's a small scale villain.
I actually want to ask you guys, especially the likes of Paolo, because they've had multiple campaigns before. Have you had created a villain that has done both, where they have shown their influence as a, you know, world scale, but indirect influence, indirect encounter, and a personal one, and how did the players react to that, and how did they connect and all that stuff? Like, just show us your experiences regarding those things. I know there's spoilers for Lex because we're in his campaign as well, but try to be as spoiler free as possible. Thank
The
you.
orchard.
I'm actually gonna have to omit some of my answers, but Paulo, you can go first while I try to
Yeah, I'm trying to.
safety
I
net
know
my
that's
response.
some of my players will probably listen to this, so I'm trying
Mhm.
not to be. I'm being careful.
Okay, previous campaigns, or like sessions that you know like it's already done with. Because for me, I had this one campaign that this was my original campaign. I originally created Minds of Pandover. That's a starter campaign.
Yes, the starter kit. Yes.
Yeah, starter kit, and it was. Oh, hi, bye, Lex. Okay, never mind. It was originally supposed to be just a regular campaign that I kind of homebrewed to become a dragon-centric kind of campaign because I have a dragonborn paladin that is secretly a Tiamat worshipper. So Tiamat is the chromatic dragon, right? The bad
Yes.
dragon, and Bahamut is the good one. So I wanted to be like, okay, how can I turn this so that way it'll be a personal thing for that character, but at the same time it can have a big impact. And I pretty much made Tiamat into the good guy and Bahamut into a bad dragon where he is possessed and stuff. And holy shit, like just the personal impact of that really changed the dynamic of my campaign in a way that every single time my players encounter a Bahamut worshiper, which is usually a good worshiper because Bahamut is on the good side, they will just fuck it up. And it went to the point where they became the bad people because from others perspectives and point of views, they're the ones that are causing havoc by um, destroying all these villages. And from the player's perspective, they're doing the right thing because they have a player who knows about the the real thing about Tiamat, that personal connection with that baddie. So they believe that they're doing something right, while everyone else believes that it's doing wrong. I had to cancel that campaign because of other reasons, but that change in perspective with that connection and the fact that they have a Bahamut Tiamat worshiper in there definitely changed a lot of stuff for me. And that's just my experience with that.
Oh, the metallic and the chromatic dragons.
Yeah.
We can get into that later. Fine.
Yes, please.
I just think that it's good to tease your players here and there, and whether or not they put two and two together, that's on them. And I'm gonna keep it at that for the sake of not saying too much, because we are so close to the last chapters of this campaign that if I feel like my tongue's gonna slip and it's just gonna spoil it and it's gonna be so disappointing. But
There's a lot of pressure.
so
Yeah.
I'm just gonna
I'll
I'm
agree
biting my
with-
tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree with you in there, but especially when it comes to reveals and just villains in general, that they always run the risk of hoping that your villain is not going to be a disappointment.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure on the DM, honestly.
Yeah.
The build up.
Mhm.
And yeah. I'm guessing Lex, go ahead.
Oh well, because the question, just so I can remember, was have we ever had a way where our small scale villain was in turn somehow affecting or being affected by the big one?
No. My question was, have you ever had a villain in one of your campaigns and or sessions where you were able to kind of like psychoanalyze the encounters while you put them in that certain place? That's all it pretty much is. What is it about that villain that like, hey, I'm gonna put you here, I consider you a personal villain because of this, or world scale villain because of that? Like, it's just humanizing and giving experiences to this question.
I see. Well, sometimes it's kind of on a basic scale. It's like, you're trying to balance everything out, include everyone's stories. So sometimes you just have to be like, well, so and so's character, I need to complete their arc. What's the most realistic way to put this? And you have to think of like the most, realistic situation where this would come up. Or, because this has already happened too, a character does something, and because of the chain reactions of things that happened before, unlock something to happen in the moment. So I'm going to take it out of scale from my story, but let's put it like this. So it's kind of like they have this eternal demonic threat coming after them, and for a while it's been kind of dormant. Like they've been going on, they've been saving villages, and it hasn't been coming around. And then they do something where it doesn't seem connected at all, but it's been demons, and there's this girl, and she happens to be like a cleric or something, or she's tied, and then she is dying, and so they're trying to save her, and then I would have my main villain come in and intercede at that moment and break it because they're at a vulnerable moment. But that's what I would use. I would use a moment to be like, realistically, because I think your villain should always be thinking of what to do next, because they're planning. They have their own plans. They're shaping. They're moving. They're affecting the world, and your players won't even notice it. And so when if they find a moment to get someone who's vulnerable, they would jump on it. This isn't spoilers because it already happened. Your character, Robin, that was all pre-planned, but the way that the story was built up, because we knew that we had to find a way to make sure that you became a ghost somehow or a spirit, was that realistically, my person, who is the epitome of a ferryman, who Harpen's dead, who the group has made angry, has been losing. He's been losing against the entire group. Every time he fought against it, he throws something new, do something adaptive, the group adapted, and they would win. And so he's like, well, crap, I need to find something else. But hold on, this random crew member isn't with them. So now's the time to strike. That's the guy to get when he's alone. And then it kind of made this awesome arc, and it was supposed to be a one-off. And then he created a whole beautiful new arc for somebody else, like player-wise, who just was brought in for that. And so that's what I would say, is that you have to think about what the big boss is doing behind the scenes, that realistically it would make sense for him to come in and affect that smaller encounter.
Yeah. And I want to add on to that in a way that I think that was a brilliant move on your part because of two things. One, it solved the issue of my personal issue with life in general sessions, and he used that Fairman to like explain why, and it makes sense. That's one aspect of it, and like you use that beautifully because it's already an existing tool in your arsenal. And two, in a way, you gave my character purpose, because you probably realized, but I didn't know it at him, but at that time I was just tagging along, researching, just exploring with the party, and I had nothing to do except to, I think, maintain like a church or a chapel because I'm a cleric. And now this happened, and it influenced my character in a way like I have a motivation to like get me my body back, and it became a personal thing for me because you inserted that thing onto it, and it created this arc that is still happening as of this time, and it's been like a year. Yeah, so I think that was a great move.
Thank you. Well, and I think we've already said it, but it's listening to the players and seeing how things are going to move. And sometimes it's using like real life experiences, like a person has to move or they're going to be out for a bit, and using that as like a catalyst to come up with something story-wise that'll make sense, and it'll move the story along. And so it's kind of just a really good improv and creative building moment. So I think that's awesome.
Essentially, what I learned from what Lex said and what everyone else has said is, essentially, villains are just tools in your arsenal. They have a purpose. You have a goal. You just need to shape those villains to whatever that goal is. But they are just tools in your arsenal, and use it however you might.
True.
Cool.
Awesome. And with that ends that section. And we're gonna move on to the villain/antagonist exercise.
Alrighty.
Lex, would you like to explain what the exercise is?
Okie dokie. Very similar to one of our previous podcasts. I had the idea to get random pictures, but instead of just throwing it on the crew, I kind of give them a list and be like, hey, make something up, and you can, for this person and how they can be a villain, and you can either do it as a narration for them, or as them, or as somebody else talking about them, or through an experience, and kind of give that flavor of what a person can do. And all four of us have approached it, I think, in relatively different ways, either having stuff pre-planned or just going in and deciding to see a character and improv it, which I think is beautiful. So you guys will see four sides.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Cool. With that being said, who wants to go first?
Lex, since you're the one who started this, do you want to start first?
Sure. I can do that.
Don't worry, we'll have like the picture of the villain that Lex has described in the middle of this video, just for those who don't know.
But for you podcast listeners, would you like to describe what your character looks like?
Okay, so
would you like to define that throughout the story?
You know. Let's see what it has. No, I'll describe the picture so that way they can understand the incentive of it. I picked originally a red dragon because I'm a very big Hobbit, Lord of the Rings fan, and I knew that I wanted to hit a big beastie. Plus, again, Critical Role did a wonderful dragon arc. And I just love dragons as both the idea of as villains and protagonists. But anyhow, I had already had a dragon encounter, which I really loved. So I picked that, and then I decided to be like, how could my party or my players at that time meeting this beast be affected or have an effect across the world? And so I decided to make it be told through a story point of view. So it's a white dragon looking with kind of a beak, and he has like large wings, and he's just in this snowy mountain background, which is like literally the setting that he was introduced in. And I thought it was a perfect thing, so that's why I chose this character. And that's what he looks like. Big wings, white scales, kind of a beakish face, and you'll see it in the
It's like
pictures.
it looks like the Blue Eyes White Dragon from Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so to set it up, just imagine that you are a traveler and you're coming into an inn, and there's this dwarf who's always known for giving you good tales, and finally he's going to tell you something about this place that you're hoping to go to, and just a very good story. So I hope this works. Otherwise, Robin, have fun fixing it in post. And when I ask you to write it out,
It's fine.
Okay, so
We'll wing
here
it.
we go. All right. So you decided to give old Vidic a bit of time. Well, as long as I still have a full pint of ale on me, I suppose I can share another tale from me travels. It's not often that an old dwarf like me gets the chance to have such a willing listener. Have you ever heard of the town of Raven's Nest? You haven't? Well, it makes sense. It's not a village on this continent. Seven Hells, it's not even much of a village anymore. You see, Raven's Nest is east of these parts, far across the domain of the Seven, and hidden in the northern parts of Armon. It was a large trading village that was known for being one of the few stops before treasure seekers decided to make a way down from the mountains into the Karzak Desert. The town was set in a snowy valley, only a few miles below the peaks of the Grey Range. Its residents were known for their fine furs and welcoming attitudes. The only thing of a true bother was the occasional winter storm that came and forced all the inhabitants and fellow traders to take shelter. Now, it was during one of these storms that it came. This thing brought a terrible vengeance to the people of Raven's Nest, so much that it is nothing more than a ruined ghost town now. How did I come about such information? Well, I was camped a few miles from the village when the terror came, and it was I who was the first to speak to the only survivors, an old ranger and a young child who must have been his daughter. Besides, nothing else could have made that terrible roar than a beast from the wars long past, an ancient white dragon. Like a winged demon, it fell upon Raven's Nest, its white scales hiding it in the tumultuous snowstorm around, its cries forcing all the villagers to stop in place, hands over their ears, otherwise being forced to stay unmoving in their fear. The dragon's powerful wings beat down, causing some of the weaker buildings to be blown away as if leaves in the wind. The creature's massive claws lifting some poor souls into the air before releasing them to quick death across the valley floor. Then there was what came from its maw. Not fire like the tales of old would say, but sheer ice, freezing all those in its path. People turned into nothing more than some kind of horrible statues, their looks of fear forever frozen in time. Didn't matter how many arrows they shot at it or spears they threw, nothing could pierce the dragon's hide. Eventually, the shouting and roars were quieted. The village became death silent. The last thing I saw of the creature was its massive form ascending to the peaks it came from. Now, when I tell this tale of the winged terror over Raven's Nest, no one seems to believe me. Again, a dragon has not been seen in these parts for hundreds of years. Some will say it was a herd of mad Goliaths. Others, a large group of bandits. Some still even suggest it may have been a response after the village's overseer angered the sultan of the region. But I know what it was, as does every lost soul in that village. So, if you by chance find your way across the oceans to the ruined village in the hidden northern parts of that land, perhaps you'll find this ghost town that was Raven's Nest. See the ruined buildings, the clawed earth, and the frozen souls within. But heed my warning. Listen to the air and be mindful. for that may not be the mountain wind that is roaring down to you. There you go. And that is my part.
Dang.
Wow. Can we?
I like it.
That's a high
I
bar.
imagined everything you said.
That gave me chills.
Robin, do you recognize the story? Thank you, guys. Thank you for that.
Yes, I did. Is it the one that me and another friend did that pretty much like? Is it the one with Garrison the Great?
It was with Garrison the Great.
Yeah,
it was Robin's little arc, and
my first ever one shot with Lex.
Yeah, and I love that one shot, and I love dragons, and so my theory of it for bringing it up was, what happens when other people hear of the things that your characters go through, and that's what I kind of want to see, because it's now become something of legend, and yeah, and I it's very I wanted to have the chance to kind of introduce you all to my world at the same time. So thank you. And thank you, Kiko, for saying that you could envision it. I was hoping that it came out nice. So thank you.
Oh yeah,
That was great. Now
I
I
was
feel bad
envisioning
for
it as a
improv.
I really envisioned it as a character sitting there, like actually sharing a drink with him, and then him telling me this, like, and then like at any moment, oh shit, I have to go outside, and I might encounter that. Fuck.
And that's and that's like a thing is like
Yeah.
the fear of the unknown is kind of your villain's defense. Yeah, I'm excited. Who's next?
So if no one goes next, I can go next.
Go for it.
Okay.
Describe your villain first, by the way.
Okay, so my villain, he looks like a decrepit-looking man. Skin looks very, I wouldn't say dead, but gray. He's wearing a brown/black overall cloak with a staff. His arms and hands seem to be covered with insects. Great power. The great motivator for most people who share my talents. But what's the use of power when you can't even keep the ones you love safe? Or even worse, be easily misguided. Power is truly a fool's folly, while others can command armies, or even the elements themselves. I can start or stop anything with a single word. Control always overcomes power, and I know best. Everyone always looks to the one on the throne, but no one ever looks to the person next to it. I've always found the ones quick to fear the easiest to motivate, but the prideful ones, those are my favorite to serve. I've seen kingdoms, heroes, and even supposedly invincible creatures rise and fall, and their demise is due to one thing, and one thing alone: attention. But do you know what the greatest part of all of this is? It never ends. There's always a new city, a new kingdom, a new face, a new voice. And as long as there are people seeking power, I'm never far behind.
Wow.
What does he change into? Can I ask that? Did he change? Is he a
Shape
shape
shift?
changer?
In the middle of the conversation, he changed into something else.
That's
Shape shifts. Damn.
Yes.
That's cool. I like it because it felt like the introduction you would get when you select the story mode for a
Yep,
for a Mortal Kombat character.
Yeah, that's what I went with for the first prompt. I was like, I want to make him sound like this is like his introduction to himself, of himself to somebody else.
Perfect.
God damn. That's the voice acting, the narration gives me chills. Holy crap.
Also, I'll say, okay, just because I have these villains out does not mean that you're going to encounter these guys in my campaign. Just saying.
I'm going to just say you'll have a chance to meet Vidic the Dwarf if you ever go to my continent.
So, you may or might not meet these people. Okay,
All right.
let's go next.
I'll go ahead, even though keep in mind it's very subpar compared to you guys, just because I'm improvising some of these, most of these, all of this. Anyways, yeah. So my villain, the description is, think of a maybe 50 to 60-year-old man with a silvery white beard and a big scar that stretches from his forehead to his lower cheek right here. It looks like a battle scar. He is looks like a decorated or maybe honorably discharged soldier. He looks to be like he was a general. He had a what looks to be orange battle hardened armor, big shoulder armor, and he has this massive great sword that's just hitched onto his leg, and it doesn't even feel like it's weighing him anything. He looks like he's seen hard shit. He looks like he's seen better days, and he looks like he's still ready to either retire or battle more. So that's the description. You walk into a bar, and it's just you and your compatriots. You see this one beaten up looking person in the corner of the bar that's kind of maniacally laughing to himself, not in a loud way, but just you can hear it enough that it bothers you. You approach them trying to ask what's wrong, and you're like, you see him smile with a beaten. You see that as you get closer to him, that he's had a hood on, but it actually he turns to look at you, and you see a faint shadow of bruises on the left side. He says, you lot coming through here with all that pitiful joy that is so meaningless. You shouldn't have come here. Do you know where you're at? You are in Marzan, one of the most cruelest, God-ridden filth of a place that you've ever looked down on. Don't you see what you're seeing here? This is Rule. There's one man. Damn. That is he even called a man? He's a monster. He ruined everything. And he looks at you with these deep, just lifeless eyes and said, we gave him everything. And he gave us this and that. And he points towards just a smattering of different beat up people on the other side that you didn't even notice. And they're all quiet on the corner. You thought that you've come here seeking for solace? You've come to the wrong place, my friend. Mazronis, whatever you do not go to the manor. That big tower right there. He lives there. No. Don't even try to get his attention. No matter how powerful you think you are. He has ways of twisting your words, ways of getting at your resources, ways of making you feel like you are worth less than nothing. He has destroyed families. He has corrupted politicians, officials. And worst of all, they believe he's the hero. But we can't do anything about it. We make one move, he will slice our throats like he does endless number of people. He has no reasoning. He has no discrimination. He will kill every single last one of you. And he has the evidence to prove it. If you will just look beyond those walls, you see those piked heads. Those piked looks like they've been stuffed. If you just look at one of those, you see a beautiful blonde girl. Yeah, that was my daughter. He ruined everything from me. He ruined everything from us. And he will not stop at anything to ruin you as well. So leave while he still doesn't know of you. Leave this place and never come back. This is not a place of solace. This is despair. This is Marzan. That's it.
And then Silent Hill theme plays in the background.
Oh man.
No.
You know, I love that that's literally how I feel like it happens like in game. Like you explain it, you meet the person, and that was really cool. I like that you gave us that chance to see it from that kind of point of view. Like it's actually like in the game kind of a thing.
From the victim, yeah.
From the victim's point of view too.
Yeah, you usually get the most impact from there. Woo! Chills. Paola?
The description will come in the story.
Yay.
So, we find ourselves in the beautifully technologically advanced city of Aloris. It's a quiet evening with fog surrounding the whole city, lights flickering, and you're not quite sure whether it's paranormal or maybe it's just an electrical circuit running rampant. But you make your way through the city, fog engulfing your whole body, and you hear the clicking of armor hit against the pavement. Is it your ears playing games on you? Or maybe the urban legends were correct about the forgotten soldier. Long ago, before Aloris was this beautiful city filled with amazing technology, it was a site of war, site of death and decay. And a soldier fought in war had a hammer stuck on his back. With mere seconds of life left, he sees this ghoulish hand appear before him, and a deal was made with the undying queen. This soldier was promised eternal life for the price of a soul each year for the rest of eternity. And so, as you make your way down the city, downtown, you see an odd-looking gentleman approaching you, slowly but surely, with nothing but a skeletal body, the smell of rotting corpse, decay emitting from its leather armor, dragging its sword, asking to see his wife and daughter for one last time.
Nice.
I like it. To me, it's like when you're playing like an RPG video game in general, like it's like the beginning intro to coming into like the new place and the boss. So that was cool. I like that. That was a good setup.
I could totally see that as a way to just, you've heard of the stories, and then I don't know where you see like the monster dragging into the scene, and then your narration just comes into play. I'm like, oh my god, this is it, kind of thing. It's so very epic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have one more if you guys are willing to listen.
Hell yeah.
No, keep going. No,
All right.
Actually, no.
I'm joking. Go.
Okay. All right.
Please.
Do it.
The look of this person, he looks somewhat like in his early, or like his late 20s, probably around 28. He's wearing like a brown trench coat. He's wearing a white shirt, grayish black pants. He's got something around his neck, as well as he's using some sort of staff as his way of walking. His name? He just you approach him because you were told that he had some news for you and he could offer his services to you. And you know that he knows the land better than anyone else. You approach him. He looks up and says, Hi, hello there. My name's I'm Maxwell Reach, adventure and excavator extraordinaire. And I'll tell you something. Tell you something. Nothing is as cool as the rush of danger of raiding old ruins and rediscovering lost lands to find some awesome doohickeys and doodads. Actually, I've got the perfect story for you. There was one time we went to go find this amulet and this staff. It was used by some old wizard or whatever. I don't really care about that. But I did need a new staff, and some new bling sounded great. So I went. The natives there kept saying how dangerous it was going to be to excavate the old pyramid, but, I had confidence in us. We already had been at this profession for years, and, not including yours truly, but, Brock and Rumple, the two brothers who were the toughest SOBs this side of Astron. And right by my side was the beautiful Selena, master thief, and the attribute of the Crimson Teeth, and as well as the love of my life. Well, we easily found the pyramid, dodged and disarmed traps, and fought our way against some of the beasts who made that tomb their home. Thanks to me, we solved the last final puzzle to open the treasure door. I hate how these dead ancient assholes hate sharing. I mean, they are dead anyway, so might as well give it to somebody who could use it. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Back to the story at hand. So, we were at the final door. I opened it. I swear it smelled like birthday candles. And then we saw it. Both the amulet and the staff placed high above the pedestal on top of a flight of stairs. As we approached the treasures, a voice echoed through the chamber, and it was like, damn, it's another person guarding these family-long old treasures. But the voice felt different. It felt old. Like, really, really old. It obviously threatened us with the same old leave or die, blah, 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 blah. But that never works. There was always no way we were going to do that after all this time and money we spent at this excavation. Come on. Then the chamber was filled with some black smoke, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a skeleton robes. And before I knew it, we were fighting this thing. Magic bolts of all kinds were sent hurling through the air. The smell of fire and brimstone filled the room. Every second there felt like I was losing a part of my soul. I tried to turn to my right to see my team, but I just saw Brock with a hole through his chest. His green energy ate through his skin, and Rumple was just a pile of ash. It was just me and Selena. Everything seemed at a loss. But as I was looking at Selena, I knew this was not the end. I told Selena that we took care of many scary beasts and so-called ancients, and we weren't going to get stopped by some old bag of bones. I mean, he's already half dead. Might as well put the rest of him down. And we did. He was dying, and the last thing he said was, only one in this room can wield the staff and amulet. I told him, I know. And I'll never forget the look in Selena's face when she realized what the inside of her lower torso looked like. And then I took the dead mage's skull, walked up, and claimed my prize. You know what they say. At most, love only lasts a lifetime, but power is eternal. So now are you ready?
What the? Yes. The twist. The whole time I was like, I want to insight check this guy. Like, is he just a liar or is he? Oh man.
I have no words.
I'm gonna have to edit the audio, Paolo. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the first impression I got from what you did was the first part was a combination of Telltale games. Like how you narrate that was exactly how I would listen to stories in Telltale games, how they narrate the different stories. But the end, though, that's straight up from the Joker. Like how the Joker just there's a plot twist that's supposed to be inhumane, and he made it sound like it's just everyday life. And I'm like, yo, this guy's demented, and I love how you were able to pull that off. I'm like, it was unexpected, but it made sense.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and it was the changing of our view of him, like, so, because like the whole time I was like, well, is his villain just low key just like he's a villain because he lies? And then, maybe it's like he's just talking about the villain.
Yeah.
Like he was describing, which is this skeleton mage. And then at the very end, you're like, oh no, this guy's 10 times worse.
He's not.
And so
Yep.
I thank you for flipping it around and making my brain think, Kiko. Also, I want to meet this guy and just I want some of our villains to meet each other and just see what happens if we get them all in a room together.
There is such a thing as an evil campaign. Just saying.
Yeah. His
That's
name,
very hard.
I know
That's
it
very
is.
hard, and
Very
that
hard.
could be its own podcast on its own.
Yes.
that character's name is Maxwell Reach. The previous character of mine's name was Sardon Ver. So
Mine was called Ancient White Dragon A.
Mine is called Sir Egros the Third. As he's the third, he's part of a long line of renowned paladins, which is how he got his power.
nice.
Yep. And mine was just the Forgotten Soldier.
Oh,
I really liked yours because it sounded like a ghost story.
that was great.
It was a great.
Yeah,
I thought
I
chills.
love this exercise, Lex. Really appreciated it. It made
Thank you,
me
Dada.
flex my creativity skill and
I
showed
like
off.
all-
everybody.
I loved all of yours. They all took different like perspectives, and
Oh,
I was like,
dude.
"Oh, that's really cool." Robin's was like a perspective of somebody like just in
vic-
fear of this guy, and then Lex is like, "You're in this tavern. This guy's telling you like a story that either he has heard or experienced, but you have no idea." And then you have another person who's like, legitimately, this is a ghost story.
There's a ghost story.
This is a straight up ghost story. Like I'd be like, "Oh, I'd be shitting bricks."
But
Right
Kiko,
about
yours is like the most topsy turvy. You went from I'm telling a ghost story to it's like, bitch, I am the villain.
Yeah, no, it was fun writing that one because I was like, all right, you're expecting him to be like, you would first think, oh, he might be the villain, or is he crazy, or is he weird, or he's just like he's gonna talk about the villain, and then I'm gonna introduce like what you guys think would be the villain, which was gonna be like the lich.
Yeah. And then you realize, no,
No.
something more.
Nope.
Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah. All right. So now with the exercise being done, the next question is, well, I mean, we could kind of like combine this together. Are there any specific things about villains, antagonists that you like as a player and as a DM? Just specific little like little things that we haven't covered.
I like when they have legendary actions.
Layer
Just on a
act-
mechanical level, I like layer and like legendary actions a lot because
Mhm.
like it gives you something else in their arsenal, and it helps you have that that little in the gameplay where it's like, oh, these guys are tough. They have something that just comes back and it's scary. And then I really like kind of what you introduced with your last character, Kiko. Like what I like in a villain is someone who you don't know the whole time, and he's also kind of likable. Like he's kind of like, ooh, like yeah, like you're kind. I like you as a player, but my character is gonna be worried to be with you, kind of a thing. So like, I think that's a cool thing. Is like when you can respect it as a player and be like, that's a really cool character with like whatever motives that he has, but I also don't want to face him at the end of the day, you know. So that's my take. What I like about villains.
Paolo?
Awesome.
Mine's pretty simple. It would just be like aesthetically speaking, like being as descriptive as you can when providing information about what they look like. I think when it's visually appealing in your head and you could just picture it in front of you, I think that's what makes it really just come to life, which I enjoy a lot. But aside from that, I guess just having a really, really fully fleshed out backstory for the villain and having the backbone already built out so that when your characters do encounter said villain, you know, then you're going to understand that this wasn't made on the spot. This was made to begin with. This was your purpose to be here.
I'm going to be a bit hypocritical in my own stuff just because as a player, I +1 Paolo because I love a villain with a fleshed out backstory and has their place in the world, as we say it. But as a DM, I am always in blank mode whenever it comes to creating a villain just because I really don't know what to create for my world in that thing. Like, All right, so I made an idealized situation. How do I twist and how do I turn it? And even then, it's really hard to create something out of that. So what I tend to do is I kind of latch on to a personal thing from a player's backstory. I just read the crap ton of players' backstories and then see, all right, what can I do that would be connected to all of them at the same time? But the thing is that because of my approach, it's in a way impossible for me to create a fully fleshed out backstory for a villain because I don't know my player characters yet. And so that way I just create an idea and then from there help build it out. And I'm saying this not because this is the right way, but because this is my way and it could help people who really don't know how to create villains in general, aka people who are watching this podcast. But for those who don't know, it's okay to take your time even when the session has started. You do not need a fully fleshed out backstory, even though your players will love you for it. If you do, you don't need to. See if you can take your time, learn their backstory, and maybe you can flesh out something from there. But make sure that by the time you introduce the thing, at least have a face and physical features, you know? Don't give them just a blank slate. That's all. Yeah. My favorite is that.
Nice. Awesome. And with that being said, we're going to end with the last thing. Anyone tell any memorable stories about any villains or antagonists they've encountered throughout their campaigns or any other people's campaigns they want to talk about? Quick story.
Can't beat any existing.
Kiko, which one are we befriending right now? That's gonna... That's my question to you. No.
Oh fuck, dude.
No.
Mr. Wondertainment.
Mr. Wondertainment.
He'll be back.
He ain't dead.
He ain't dead. We don't think he's dead.
No. Sorry. Inside joke, viewers. No.
Man, the viewers who watched the previous episode are so confused.
Don't worry. If you guys watch this thing and you guys definitely want to see who we're talking about, please comment on the thing telling Kiko to publicize the sessions that we're up on YouTube, so that way you guys can be an inside joke. Poke at him. Just saying.
I agree.
Also, if there's anything that you disagree with or maybe just want to chime in with in the comments, feel free. Like, we would love your opinion on things. Like, I don't know. I don't think there's a perfect DM except Matt Mercer. I mean, just like there's no perfect DM. I think just it's a learning process for everybody. We're all just trying to build up our craft. So yeah, feedback would be awesome.
Yeah,
and to tag on that note, if there is a subject that you want us to talk about, we do have set lists of ideas of what we want to bring up. But if you ever want us to talk about something in particular, maybe we can make a podcast around that too.
Yeah, just let us know.
But going back to Kiko's prompt, because I realized we all ignored his question.
I can answer
Upcoming
that.
session TPK.
I can answer that question.
We all die next session, guys.
One of the villains that I actually love that I encountered, I'm assuming that was your question, right?
Yes.
Okay, is actually the ferryman. And this is, yes, I'm speaking to the Lexus campaign that I'm a player in. The ferryman is currently a villain in my personal characters, both backstory and current story, in a way that he is in a way holding my life. And the reason why I loved him is because it was in a way both unexpected and in a way like, this makes total sense. Like I said beforehand, the ferryman is this just raw visceral evil. And it's visceral evil in the way that you know that they're the essence of it. Like, there is no good about them. There's no way of dissuading them, like, hey, go onto the good side with us. They're built to be that way, but it makes sense because that's part of their humanity. That's part of their creation. But in a way, they're also just kind of doing their job. The ferryman's job is to grab the souls of people and then put them on a ship, kind of like Hades from the underworld. But our job as players is to not have them complete their job because it has our friends. So I love that we're pretty much trying to tell a villain to not do their job. But at the same time, there's no we know the eventuality of it is we're gonna kill him, but we love just
We
the.
might. We don't know.
We
if
don't. We
can.
don't.
Did you say that
We
you
don't know if
know
we
you're gonna kill
can.
him? Okay.
My bad. We might. We want to. It's a really good plot device, and a really good character fleshed out.
One thing I'll add on to Robin's thing is I like that he's just a force of nature.
Oh yeah, he's just part of the background.
And like that, just to comment on it, is that he was not at all supposed to be part of the story. What happened is, and here, let me give you an advice of how not to be careful with your counter building. I killed one of my players within 3 sessions of playing time, and they somehow have to go into the afterworld, and then they met this being, and I had to create it because of the characters, and then he somehow has persisted to still be the villain, and that's what's made him this strong thing. And whether Robin, whether you stop him or not, he's a force now to contend with. So
Speaking into existence.
That's been fun. Paulo,
Hopeful,
sorry.
wishful thinking.
Paulo?
I'm gonna shout out this animator, Dingo Doodles, on YouTube. Their animation and their D&D storytelling is just amazing. So go check it out. And I was watching one of the episodes a few months ago, and I believe it was like a few months ago. I don't know. Time is an illusion during COVID. So
Essentially.
Real talk.
there was this little girl with very pink dress, with a bun in her hair, and her name is Bouclair, and she was the villain of that arc of the story, and nobody would have guessed it until she started speaking and talked about the ungodly things that she did to the whole empire or city. But I won't give too many spoilers out if you want to watch the D&D story time that they have, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. So shout out to that YouTube channel.
Nice.
I'll try to be quick, 'cause I know we're super pushing time in general, but I'll hit 3. I actually want to do 3 things. I want to do someone who's inspired me outside of D&D, being a villain who I went against as a player, and then a villain I created. So inspired by, I just in general, I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a great thing to look at, and it's that concept of having an entity that's larger than life that's coming, and we've already addressed this, but Thanos is like such a cool concept, is that you have all these big bosses, if you like the concept of having your characters face their own big bosses and fleshing it out so that eventually they're going to fight this big thing is really cool. And that's an inspiration of what I liked from the outside, and then everything that Matt Mercer does. Thank you, Paulo, for already referencing that. And then when I was a player, I was in this campaign. I actually never had any set villain because I joined late, so I had no set villain that I was against. But my DM was smart, and he had one of my characters be tied to another player's main villain, and therefore I felt the need to have a new bad guy, because he was threatening things that I cared about, and it also helped me build my bond with one player in particular. It had me a reason to stay in the group and a reason to be there, and story-wise it made sense. And then for one that I created, one of my players is currently he's John Wick basically, and he's being followed by a group of assassins called the Black Thorn, and finding fun ways to bring up a new interesting assassin who has his own special thing, whether he be a bomb maker and he likes to blow things up, or a sibling trio of insectoid bug controllers. It's been really kind of fun to just be like, I basically get to make mini bosses with every encounter. And have fun, Kiko, at the next one.
I'm also a part of that.
That comes your way.
I'm also a part of
and
that.
you, Robin. But yeah. So those are my things.
Nice.
Yeah.
For me, okay, well, to piggyback off of what Lex was saying, what inspires a lot of my villains when I do things is literally comic book villains. A lot of comic book villains, like all across, not just Marvel and DC, but like other things too. They really inspire a lot of like slight things about characters. I always add my own twist to things, but that they're always like a good kicking off point when I'm like in complete writer's block mode. And then beyond that,
like what exactly? Just maybe one or two like inspiration. Like, can you give us?
Okay. Really big inspiration is Doctor Doom. If you really know what his backstory is and really know like why he does the things he does and why he feels he's justified, he's literally the most perfect villain ever written.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's I'll think about that.
Yeah. So that's when I go to like my golden standard of a villain is Doctor Doom. Doesn't mean that I'm always going to use that as my template. I'm just saying that that's the golden standard in my mind.
I see. Okay. Because I take a lot of inspiration from the Forgotten Realms wiki. Thank you for the Forgotten Realms wiki has just been like my best friend because, and again, we'll talk about BBEGs, but Tiamat and Vecna and Xanathar and the Archmages, it's just there's so much to go in depth with it, and we could probably go on for hours, but I'm sure we are over time at this on this podcast. So did anybody want to add anything before we finish it up?
Last thing was my memorable villain is the Madame of the Orchard. That is my memorable villain because she's the type of person who pulls a lot of strings behind the scenes, but also is a really good manipulator.
So,
thank you.
One last thing before we do wrap this up, I do want to ask you guys one more thing. Just everyone one thing. Can you give one tip to an aspiring DM on how they should create, an ideal villain? Just one tip. Could be general as possible. Go. And we'll start with the person on my left, which is Lex.
Okay. My thing is, I'm going to go back onto what I originally said at the beginning of the podcast, and that it's as long as you make someone who can, if he or she was by themselves, or this group was by themselves, they would be the heroes, and you can shut them around enough that that's how they are. They'll be able to affect your world and react appropriately, and you'll know exactly what it is. So if you know them by putting them in the mindset of they are the protagonists of this story, it'll help you make a really strong villain, as well as also listening to your characters and understanding which ones you should actually throw at them.
All right, Paolo.
One tip, just have this sense of threat to them. Just make sure that they hold power and have like the danger level like I mentioned earlier, because just having that power over other people is already terrifying within itself. So take it as you will.
And Kiko?
One thing I haven't said earlier is that as a DM, play to the strengths of what you can present. Like, if you're really good at doing a deep, maniacal person, go for it. If you're really good at being a more bombastic, presentable type of person, go for it. If you can do both, then do it. But overall, play to your strengths and play to what you know. Never play to something you don't know. Always play to what you know.
And for me, my one tip is that it is definitely okay to not have a big, bad, evil guy / girl in your campaign by session 1. You don't need to yet. It's okay to just have an idea in the back of your head and just go on as the session goes, but try to have one by the time you introduce them to your players. But yeah, that's it. No rush, no fuss, but have them by the encounter. And that's all I have. Cool. All right, Kiko?
All right, with that being said, we are DMs the PM. We're calling it a night. And good night, everybody. Good luck on your rolls.
Bye.
Bye.